Welcome to Calgary Talks, the social series. I have a chance to talk to great Calgarians on a regular basis, and this series is welcoming you into all of those conversations. Well, it's good to see you. I've got Bill Black with me today. He's the president and CEO of the Calgary Construction Association, a really important partner to the city of Calgary. And I think, we need to realize that without the construction sector, we really wouldn't be able to practice city building. So it's a pleasure to have you here today. And I'll kick it off with a really easy question for you. What's your perspective on where Calgary is today? And what do you think we need to do to engage with the sector more?
Well, I think one of the things that our sector values is as much runway visibility of future as possible, because it helps our industry understand how to staff up, how to resource up. It also gives industry an opportunity to offer ways to engage in some of the due diligence, some of the decision making, some of the thought that might be happening in early conceptual stages. And I think one of the challenges our industry has is all too often we only get engaged when the procurement is ready, after all the decisions have been made. And very often we're looking at a set of plans and documents going, I wish we'd been there when they were making these decisions earlier.
That's a really good point, and it leads to my next question for you. What is it that we can be doing better as the city of Calgary to improve the relationship and to really get the best outcomes?
Well, I think one of the things that is really important that our industry will engage in independently is sitting down at the end of a project and discussing what we learned. What would we want to do again? What would we want to do differently? What were the opportunities that we could take advantage of if more repetition could happen? So every project isn't just a reinvention of the same wheel. I think that would be important. To be able to do that with the customer and even some of the end users would be even more valuable in informing future decisions and passing learning on, so we keep getting better, more effective, more efficient. That way you would see projects happen faster, you would see money being spent more effectively, and hopefully the end results would be better.
And that's a great point, to do a debrief and to understand the lessons that are learned and how can you replicate the successes that you experienced and avoid any of the pitfalls that you had. And to the point that you just made a couple of minutes ago, how do you view our ability to engage with you early? So when a project is being conceived, because we know there's technicalities around how involved we can be before we get to procurement. What's your thought on how we do that? How do we connect with you in the early stages?
Well, I think over recent years, it has become a lot more controlled and limited. And there are reasons behind trying to make things a little more regimented and have more regulation or prevent certain types of behaviors happening. But when you shut out that opportunity to get innovation at the table early when it's of highest value, you've maybe taken that restriction too far. And you're not allowing stakeholders to get in a room with some subject matter expertise at a time when decisions don't cost a lot. And it's well proved over decades and decades. The highest opportunity to affect the outcome of a construction project is in the earliest stages. And the more you invest there, the more you will be able to control and improve outcomes.
Well, and it's a valuable lesson too. I mean, we want to make sure that we're doing everything by the book, but at the same time, when we've got an organization like Calgary Construction Association, who doesn't actually bid on anything, you're simply a representative, making sure that your members' interests are best served. I think engaging with you is a different scenario than the tricky business of procurement. So thank you for that.
If I can just interject there, that statement is actually the reason I ended up taking this job. I originally didn't want to. I felt I was better serving the industry by being in the industry itself. And somehow by getting into an association role, I was taking myself out of a place to add value. And it was when somebody at the City of Calgary said the value of an association that we can engage through industry together with them is an incredibly important thing in Calgary's future. That one simple perspective was the light bulb that led me to go back to the board and say, you know what, I was wrong. There is an incredible opportunity to make a valuable difference here for industry and for Calgary. I think I want this job.
Well, I'm glad you had that conversation because
So
you've been a great representative, and you're very straightforward about your perspective on things. So let me ask you, where do you see our city heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, having been a resident of Calgary since '91, when I first came here from Scotland, I've seen incredible change. And as a builder, you get to participate in that change firsthand. You're literally working on the projects. Mm-hmm. And you're driving around, for years afterwards, boring your family, pointing out to them all the jobs you worked on, and their eyes are rolling and whatever. I look at what Calgary has done over the last 3 to 5 years and what is coming with an Arts Commons, with Olympic Plaza, with the Glenbow, with the BMO now in place, with the Events Centre, and many other projects that will spawn from these. I'm jealous that I don't get to actually build them because they are that important, they are that prominent in creating a life experience for Calgarians, especially the young ones that will get to enjoy them for, the next 30, 40 years, as I have since I moved here. And I think Calgary is about to embark upon completely changing the next chapter on the world stage and locally for better live, work, play experiences and world-class facilities that are going to put Calgary in the front lines all across the world.
I love that. And you know what? We often talk about the new things that we're building. And we talk about the success that we've had in revitalization. The thing that we don't talk about sometimes is the maintenance work that needs to be done. And the construction sector has a very big role to play when it comes to maintenance. So tell me, what is your perspective on how well we've been doing as a city in making those investments in infrastructure maintenance?
Well, the reality is when you look nationally at infrastructure across Canada in all major cities, we have a really serious infrastructure deficit. That's a physical deficit, in that infrastructure tends to be viewed as buried cost. There's no ribbon cutting for a new water main or a new sewer line. It doesn't have the glitz and the glamour. Mm-hmm. Taxpayers don't necessarily get to see the tangible outcome of their dollars being spent. And it has become rather easy to kick the can down the road and concentrate on things that might be more prominent, to the detriment of the aging infrastructure. It doesn't stop aging because you've decided to prioritize something else. If you don't maintain your car, if you don't change the oil, if you don't put new tires on when they wear out, you'll get into problems, you'll have accidents, your car will cease to halt in Deerfoot. When that happens, it's your fault. It's not the manufacturer, it's not your mechanic's fault. It's your fault because you didn't do the preventative maintenance. And infrastructure is no different. And I do think we need, as Calgarians and across Canada, to make serious and dedicated long-term investments in ongoing preventative maintenance, and frankly, decouple them from election cycles so that they become permanent, reality-based preventative maintenance and investment for long-term security.
Something that I've noted over the last few months, when we make investments into infrastructure, it gets noticed by the folks that are in that business. So the Alberta Road Builders, the Association of Maintenance Contractors, they've been very happy to see the budget that this council passed because they understand how important it is to invest in infrastructure maintenance. But it's not as cool as opening a new convention center. So how do we work together to explain to the public why we need to make those investments?
Well, I think the funny thing is, even though it's not as sexy and visually enticing as an event center, complaints about potholes are pretty loud. and pretty high volume. People value being able to commute around this city comfortably and effectively. They value being able to drive around their neighborhoods safely, and their kids can ride their bikes without them worried about potholes, etc. Just because it isn't sexy doesn't mean to say it's fundamental to quality of life and the well-being of people in this city. And at the end of the day, there's a very, very powerful message comes out of the water main. If you don't fix it, it will eventually blow. And when it blows, it'll cost 3 times as much to fix it as it would have through preventative measures. And the inconvenience factor and the impact on the quality of life for everyday Calgarians will suffer massively in comparison to preventative measures. That definitely isn't sexy.
Well, and certainty and predictability is what people want from their municipal services, and we need to keep investing.
Well, and I think it helps you feel more secure and more settled when the really obvious stuff isn't still bugging you. You know, why are the potholes outside my home patched in the spring, but by September they're starting to open up again? It helps you relax and focus on enjoying your life rather than being irritated or having your joy of your community impeded every time you set foot outside your home.
You know what, that's a really good point. A lot of times elected officials look for tangibles and they look for the big shiny object that they can point to. But I would say that people's quality of life is equally well served when we have a proper budget for the maintenance that's required. And we learned that lesson this summer. We learned the lesson with the break in the water feeder main, and we had a budget process this year that really highlighted for us just how big that infrastructure gap is. So I think there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen with the construction sector so that we have a very clear view of the things that we should be looking after. And I know you and I have built a relationship over time. I remember back when the pandemic hit, we talked about what could we do to make sure that we could keep construction sites open. And full credit to industry, you were able to put measures in place to ensure people had a place to wash their hands and that there was, separation of people as they were doing their work. But we kept construction going. And then most recently, when it came to the feeder main break, I remember Calgary Fire Department imposed some restrictions on what's called hot works. And you called me right away and said, this isn't going to work. I connected you with the chief, and you were able to sort things out. So tell me a little bit about how you see the collaborative role between what you do and how you serve your members and what I do. What should the relationship look like?
Well, I think first and foremost that we wanted to keep things operating on sites during COVID, and we wanted to make sure that the hot works ban didn't shut down progress. But we never wanted that to be at the expense of the safety and welfare of Calgarians, the public, and our own people that were on the job sites. And I think by having a real conversation and a bit of transparency of dialogue, there was an understanding that this wasn't just a special interest group that wanted their cake and eat it or wanted it to be their way and the highway. It was, how can we help? How can we do the right thing for Calgarians and for the public, but also make sure that these critical projects don't grind to a halt, because that will have other knock-on effect. I think ease of picking up a phone and having a simple, good old-fashioned analog conversation, albeit over digital means, relationship, a degree of trust that we're creating an issue because we are concerned. And it was really seen out in the way the fire department came back after we'd managed to get them information. And they actually thanked us for providing them with the information in their language so that they could make an educated decision and respecting what they were trying to achieve, whilst also helping them balance their decisions with the needs of projects, etc. It's good old-fashioned trust-based relationships, doing the right things with the right people for the right reason.
And that's, it's an art that we seem to have lost to some degree. People are sending emails or texts rather than just picking up the phone. And I think it's really important to have the face-to-face conversations, the telephone conversations to build trust. Because really, that's the thing that makes public-private partnerships succeed. And so, in your view, what are some of the opportunities that we have with public-private partnerships, and what are some of the drawbacks that you've experienced?
Well, I think one of the things I mentioned already was the value of earlier engagement in conceptual stages and not feeling that everything has to be done in silos. So I think a public-private conversation on a regular basis, and in addition to that, an opportunity to sit down on specific projects or initiatives is valuable. And I think industry at all levels would be very, very ready to sit down and engage in these types of conversations. But then when you get to the next stage and you really start to partner on the project itself, when you have a proper partnership between your providers and your stakeholders and your owners, and everybody is engaged around the project, you end up with best for project thinking. It's not best for individual or best for stakeholder, it's best for project. And people start to make decisions that might be best for the project and not completely in their interests, but they know the success of the project will actually write the success for everybody. And partnership done right will bring that to bear on a project, and it unlocks a discretionary effort and commitment that you can never get out of a contract.
So let's talk about a pretty stark reality. We know we've got a housing shortage. We've known that for some time. We are also now seeing about 250 people a day moving to our city, which just puts more pressure on that housing shortage. So what do we need to do to address that? And what do we need to do to address the infrastructure that all those folks who are moving here are going to need, because they don't bring schools and pools and roads with them? We need to invest in those things.
Oh, well, I think we need to be willing to invest ahead, maybe more so ahead than people are regularly comfortable with, because it is such a significant volume at such a fast rate that the reality is our current rate of building is flat out and it's not keeping up. And there is a certain ceiling of volume that you can attain that you really can't get realistically above without exploring different methodologies. But I do think this is where other orders of government need to step up, because it's their campaign that was successful. Alberta called and people are showing up, and now cities are left, and I've heard you talk on that very realistically. The other orders of government need to step up as well, because it's tax revenue for them. As cities grow, investment comes, more tax revenue comes. And I do think that's where to just leave a municipality to fight the wave of incoming people is probably destined to fail if they're left alone without significant resource, funding, and support to get there. Because we can barely keep up, and the reality is we need to get ahead.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because people sometimes forget that the original deal was always that municipalities would deliver the services, but it would be in partnership with both the provincial and federal governments. And over time, they just slid those responsibilities over to us without providing the funding that's needed. We've got more than $400 million of a gap in what we should be receiving from the province versus what we're actually getting.
The reality is, it's a relationship between funding and resources. If the resources are there and the funding isn't there, it doesn't really matter, because how do you fund the growth? If the funding is there and the resources aren't there, then the funding sits untapped. So it has to be a concurrent strategy. And our industry is the kind of industry where people will migrate to where the work is, especially those in the field, because they are generally compensated based on hours worked. They need 2,200 to 2,400 hours a year to maintain their lifestyle, pay their bills, support their families. And in general, they will go to where that work is. We've seen it happen here in our boom and bust cycles in the past. how people have come and gone depending on which cycle we were in. And so if the investment was there that allowed the work to be put on the table, I do believe we would get more resources, because for the first time maybe in 40 or 50 years, Calgary could have a reputation for not being a boom and bust town, for being a growth town of stable, regular, dependable growth year over year, where you come here and you plant your feet here to work and you don't leave. You don't need to watch for oil going down in value and start planning your exit strategy, because perhaps our growth and the work and the opportunity to construct all the different elements of our city will be so stable and so consistent.
How do you envision a future where we're better able to collaborate to provide Calgarians with what they need?
I think being willing to potentially identify pilot projects that allow us to innovate together so that we can try new ways of doing things in a controlled environment that will allow us to learn how to do them on a larger scale. So it doesn't always have to be the project itself. I think there are opportunities to collaborate on innovation and new ideas. Learning from other experiences, going out to other parts of the country and even the world to learn what they're doing elsewhere and see if they are indeed valid for our geography and our part of the world. I always say, based on a friend of mine from years ago, stealing one person's idea is plagiarism, but stealing everybody's ideas is research. So I think that kind of research together. So if the city sees something, they can bring it to industry, and industry say, it's actually not as good as you think because here are the unintended, or vice versa. I do think innovative collaboration is one way to unlock new ways and prevent us from getting stuck in a rinse and repeat methodology. Be willing to try, be willing to fail, but fail in the light of trying to make progress, and I think we will. To some degree, the downtown conversion program is a bit of a pilot in that sense. It was a need-based decision, and it was a way to unlock roadblocks through additional funding, and it had a successful effect on a number of projects, and then the learnings coming from these will inform the next phase. I think more of that. It's entrepreneurial, it's realistic, and it moves you forward.
You know, we talked a little bit about the downtown conversion program. One of the biggest things we've been able to accomplish is when we are doing conversions or retrofitting buildings to make them more energy efficient. And really, it helps people save on their bills, and it provides a new life to that particular building. What do we need to do better in terms of working with your association and your members when we are going about big initiatives like energy efficiency?
Well, I think, the interesting thing when it comes to, energy consumption, natural resource consumption, the built environment is a tremendous user of raw materials.
Let me ask you maybe the last question. What can we do to work together to address the skilled labor shortage that you're experiencing? How can we partner on that?
I think one of the things, when the city itself has so much involvement in some of the major projects that are what I call the skyline projects. They're the kind of buildings that dominate the skyline of our city. Things like BMO, the Event Centre, Arts Commons, Glenbow, these are real city building projects. We will often at the end of these projects see quite a bit of press coverage of an official opening, and there's dignitaries and other stakeholders there. We rarely get stories about the men and women who built them. And that, I think, is a missed opportunity that we often, we might acknowledge them during construction. We might have pizza days for the trades during the BMO. In fact, I believe we did. There were 2,400 safety orientations on that project during its construction. That's 2,400 people visited that site for the first time. 2,200 of them were probably tradespeople and folks that were directly involved in the construction. You need more than a pizza day. You need to tell the stories of the men and women, have them tell their own stories. Because when they drive down McLeod Trail into downtown, they're not discussing the color of the siding and the fact that it looks like it doesn't match in all areas, as many others are. They're telling their kids, I worked on that project. I was on that project when it was just a steel skeleton, or I was on that project when it was just a hole in the ground. They're telling the stories we as city builders need to tell them as well. And coming from the city means so much more in branding the value of trades and construction to the everyday Calgarian than when it comes from us, because it just sounds like we're advertising. Mm-hmm. So I think telling more of these stories and showing the value and the commitment of somebody building the cancer center, they're delivering healthcare. They're not just building a building. The BMO Centre, they're creating an opportunity for Calgary to be exposed to the world. Somebody's building an event centre. They're creating the hub of an entertainment district that will engage Calgarians for 40 more years, just like the Saddle Dome did. When they're building a school, they're creating education that their own kids, their own grandkids will be in. When they're building homes, they're creating communities where people will buy their first home and start a family and be the next generation of Calgarians. That's what tradespeople create, and we don't tell that story enough.
That's a really good point. You know what? The amount of pride that tradespeople have in the end product that they've created, we need to translate that from being not just their own personal sense of pride. We need to make sure that we're very proud of the folks that deliver on the projects that we envisioned, because without them, it would just be some drawings on paper. So really good reminder.
Yeah, it's an inanimate thing, or it's an inconvenience because a lane is closed on Deerfoot or whatever, if you look at it superficially. But when you tap into the pride and the years of work it takes people to be good enough to work on some of these projects, I think there's stories there. Our industry is a people business, and the people often get missed because the building's really impressive. It gets the award. It gets the recognition. It gets to stand there for decades. I still drive by buildings, and my kids are nearly 30 years old. I still go, I worked on that project.
Yep. You know what? It's a good reminder to make sure that we're celebrating the people that participate in city building rather than just the final product. And I think it's important for us to work together as well to ensure that upcoming generations understand how critical this work is and how valuable it would be to consider a career in the trades.
Absolutely.
So great opportunities for partnership. I want to thank you so much for coming to join me today, and I look forward to continuing working with you.
Very much so. We have a great city already. I can't imagine how great it will be if we keep this up for the next decade and beyond.
Let's do it. Thank you, Ben.